The night my husband gave me the gift, my chest tightened before I even opened the box. It looked expensive, thoughtful, something a loving partner would plan carefully. Everyone in the room smiled, waiting for my reaction. If this story already feels familiar, take a second to like, subscribe, or comment, because sometimes the quiet stories are the ones we need to hear the most. On the outside, my life looked steady. Married, middle class, no obvious drama. On the inside, I was holding my breath every day, trying to build a career that mattered to me. I worked long hours, came home exhausted, and still felt like I was falling behind. Money was always tight, not desperate but constantly stressful. I carried guilt for wanting more when stability was supposed to be enough. My husband often said he supported me, but his support came with conditions, subtle ones. He'd remind me how tired I looked, how hard life already was, how much pressure my ambition added to our marriage. I told myself he was just worried. The gift turned out to be something that would make my life easier. That's what he said. But as he explained it, I realized it quietly removed a choice from me, my choice. Everyone clapped. I smiled. And inside I felt something crack, because love shouldn't feel like a door closing. After that night, the gift sat in our house like a polite lie. On the surface, it solved problems, saved money, reduced stress, gave us more time. That's what my husband kept saying. I did this for us, he'd remind me whenever I hesitated. His tone was calm, reasonable, the kind that makes you question your own reaction. But my days began to feel smaller. I noticed it in the mornings, when I woke up with anxiety before my feet even touched the floor. The routine I'd built around my work was suddenly gone, replaced by long stretches of quiet that felt less like rest and more like erasure. When I tried to talk about going back to my plans, he'd sigh. Why are you making life harder than it needs to be? Friends didn't understand. You're lucky, they said. Most partners wouldn't do that. Their words landed like pressure on my chest. If everyone thought this was love, what did it say about me that I felt trapped? At night, I replayed conversations in my head, wondering if I was being dramatic. Maybe I was ungrateful. Maybe ambition really was selfish. I lay awake listening to the hum of the house, feeling ashamed for missing a version of myself that no longer seemed welcome. I wasn't failing loudly. I was disappearing quietly. The doubts followed me everywhere, even into small moments. At the grocery store, I caught myself calculating prices more carefully than before, aware that my financial independence had slipped without anyone naming it. At family dinners, relatives asked what I was up to now, and I answered vaguely, embarrassed by how empty my days sounded out loud. My husband noticed my silence, but misunderstood it. See, he said once, half smiling. You're less stressed already. I wanted to scream that stress isn't always loud, that sometimes it sits heavy in your throat, making it hard to speak at all. I started second-guessing my memories. Had my career really mattered that much? Was I rewriting the past to justify my discomfort? When I tried to journal, the pages filled with questions instead of answers. Why do I feel guilty for wanting my own life? Why does love feel like something I owe, not something I receive? One evening, we argued softly, no shouting, just sharp words wrapped in calm voices. I thought you trusted me, he said. The sentence hit me harder than anger ever could. Because I did trust him. That's why this hurt. Later, alone in the bathroom, I stared at my reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked tired, unsure, and afraid of naming what she already knew. This wasn't support. It was control wearing a gentle mask. The pressure didn't explode all at once. It leaked into everything. I stopped mentioning ideas because every suggestion turned into a debate about practicality, timing, or sacrifice. Now isn't the right moment, he'd say. Or worse, why can't you just be content for once? The word content began to feel like a cage. I smiled through it, nodded, told myself this was what compromise looked like in marriage. Socially, I started pulling back. Friends asked why I was quieter, why I no longer talked about work the way I used to. I laughed it off. Inside, I felt exposed, like everyone could see the gap where my confidence used to live. I avoided networking events, telling myself they weren't useful anymore. Each excuse made the next one easier. At night, I lay awake counting the cost of everything: rent, groceries, the gift, my silence. I felt dependent in a way that scared me, but I was too tired to fight it. When I tried to explain the heaviness in my chest, my husband said, "You're overthinking again." And I believed him because doubting myself had become routine. The worst part wasn't the loss of momentum. It was the growing belief that maybe I never deserved it in the first place. The humiliation came quietly, disguised as concern. One afternoon, I overheard my husband talking to someone on the phone. He laughed lightly and said, "Yeah, she needed a break." I stepped in before she burned herself out. He didn't sound cruel. He sounded proud. And in that moment, I realized my story was being told without me in it. I felt exposed, like my ambition had been framed as weakness instead of effort. When I confronted him later, he looked genuinely confused. "I was protecting you," he said. "Why are you turning this into something negative?" I didn't have an answer that felt strong enough. Financially, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. I asked before spending. I explained purchases that never needed explaining before. Each small moment chipped away at my sense of adulthood. I felt like a dependent, not a partner. I tried to fix myself instead of the situation. I read articles about gratitude, about marriage, about letting go of ego. Nothing worked. The anxiety followed me into my sleep, into my mornings, into every quiet hour. I wasn't chasing success anymore. I was just trying to survive without losing myself completely, and I didn't know how much longer I could pretend this was love. By then, my world had narrowed to the size of our apartment. Days blended together, quiet and heavy. I moved through them carefully, like someone trying not to knock over fragile furniture. I avoided conflict because it felt exhausting. Every conversation had the potential to turn into a lesson about practicality, gratitude, or sacrifice. The loneliness surprised me the most. I was married, yet I felt deeply alone. I missed being seen for who I was becoming, not just who I used to be. When I looked at old emails, old notes from projects I once cared about, my chest ached like I was reading letters from a past life. I tried to talk to my mother once. She said, "At least he provides." Many women would be grateful. Her words shut something down inside me. If even my own family couldn't understand this quiet loss, maybe it really was mine to carry alone. At night, I lay awake listening to my husband breathe, wondering how love could feel so one-sided. I felt guilty for resenting him, guilty for wanting more, guilty for feeling trapped by something that looked generous from the outside. The fear wasn't just about my career anymore. It was about what would be left of me if I kept shrinking. The realization didn't arrive with clarity. It arrived with exhaustion. One morning, I sat at the kitchen table long after my coffee had gone cold, staring at nothing. I felt empty, worn down by weeks of pretending I was fine. My body felt heavy, like it was carrying a truth my mind was afraid to touch. I wasn't angry. I wasn't brave. I was tired of explaining myself, tired of justifying my dreams, tired of feeling like love was something I had to earn by being smaller. For the first time, I admitted something quietly, just to myself. This can't be how the rest of my life feels. The thought scared me. Change felt dangerous. Staying felt familiar. I didn't know which fear was worse. I imagined what would happen if I spoke up again. The tension, the disappointment, the possibility of being dismissed one more time. My hands shook just thinking about it. And yet, beneath the fear, there was a faint awareness, small but persistent, that something had already broken. That silence wasn't protecting me anymore. That doing nothing was still a choice, and it was costing me pieces of myself. I didn't know what I would do next. I only knew I couldn't keep living like this forever. The decision didn't feel heroic. It felt shaky and uncertain, like stepping onto ice you weren't sure would hold. I didn't suddenly believe in myself. I just reached a point where fear stopped being a reason to stay still. I started by telling myself the truth at night, in whispers so quiet they felt almost imaginary. I want my work back. I want my voice back. Saying it didn't make it easier, but it made it real. I began planning in secret, not because I wanted to lie, but because I needed space to think without being corrected. I looked up old contacts, reread job descriptions, updated my resume one line at a time. Every small step felt dangerous, like I was doing something forbidden. I imagined all the ways it could fail. The rejection emails, the arguments at home, the possibility that my husband would see this as betrayal instead of growth. My stomach stayed tight with anxiety, but there was also something else, quiet determination mixed with dread. I wasn't chasing success. I was trying to survive with my dignity intact. I promised myself I wouldn't make dramatic moves. No ultimatums. No speeches. Just careful effort. A test to see if the version of me who once dreamed still existed. I didn't know if this path would save my marriage or break it. I only knew I had to try. Balancing everything was harder than I expected. I worked in fragments of time. Early mornings, late nights, moments stolen between responsibilities. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically, but stopping felt worse than continuing. There were setbacks almost immediately. Applications went unanswered. One interview ended with a polite smile that meant no. Another opportunity vanished after weeks of waiting. Each disappointment whispered the same cruel question: what if he was right about you? At home, tension grew. My husband noticed my distraction, my guarded phone calls, my late nights. He didn't ask directly. Instead, he made comments about priorities, about stress, about how peaceful things used to be. The guilt came back strong, but I pushed through it. Then there were small wins. A freelance project that paid less than it should have, but paid. A message from an old colleague who said, "I'm glad you reached out." Tiny moments that didn't fix everything but proved I wasn't invisible. I was still scared, still doubting, still one bad day away from giving up. But for the first time in a long while, the struggle felt like movement, not suffocation. And that made all the difference. The outcome wasn't dramatic. No big announcement. No sudden transformation. Just a slow shift that became impossible to ignore. I began earning consistently, not enough to brag about, but enough to feel like my effort mattered. My confidence didn't arrive all at once, it returned in pieces. I spoke differently. I stood straighter. I stopped apologizing for wanting a life that felt like mine. The hardest part was the conversation I could no longer avoid. When I finally told my husband everything, how the gift felt, how small I had become, how quietly I had been rebuilding myself, there was a long silence. He didn't yell. He didn't apologize either. He just listened, and that told me more than words could. Our marriage changed after that. Not magically, not perfectly. Some days we struggled. Some days we didn't understand each other at all. But the power imbalance was gone, and I refused to carry someone else's fear as my limit. What I learned is this: love that costs you your identity is not protection, it's control. And choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving others. It means you stop disappearing. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay for more real stories like this. Because sometimes survival is the bravest success of all.